The morning was just beginning, but Eris already had responsibilities to attend to. A single mother's work is never done. She had managed to rest with her 2 pups over the night, so she wasn't too tired, but her body was still racked with wounds and bruises from her daily life. Not to mention, she was very hungry, and so were her boys. So, with a wolf to her sons, Eris set out to find something to eat and solidify her territory. Despite all of the hell Eris had been through the past few months, she couldn't help but appreciate the beautiful flowers of the summer season. She had experienced some of the worst months in her life this year, but she was starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Her anxiety ran strong in her veins, but there was a change in the wind. The cool breezes of autumn were starting to ripple through her coat, and the changing season gave Eris some hope for the future. The distant howls of dispersal wolves had become quite appealing to her lately. Getting a new mate was not something she thought of often, but as autumn and the prospect of becoming nomadic with her pups neared, it seemed like she may have a chance to find love once again. She had met a few males in her days out here. Boron was decent, and Spectre was a little too immature for her. But Stormcloud was very intriguing. She hadn't heard from him in weeks, though, and she was beginning to fear the worst. Perhaps he's still around, or maybe she'd find someone else to share her days with. The crisp breeze gave Eris some much-needed energy, but it wasn't the only thing Eris was enjoying. The summertime brought a bounty of rabbits. It's her least favorite prey, but it's all she could catch at the moment. She was grateful to have any prey she was capable of catching at this point. In order to feed herself and her 2 pups, she would have to fill up on the stringy rodents. So she caught rabbit after rabbit after rabbit in an attempt to fill her belly. A summer storm began to blow in, which dampened the sense of prey around her. Eris had to just follow her eyes at this point, and she had learned very quickly that prey lingered around the town. She headed that direction, picking off bunny after bunny that she managed to spot. Tonight, after a thorough search, Eris concluded that the storm had scared the hares off into their burrows. The lightning and thunder crashed overhead, and Eris grew worried her boys would get scared. So with a final catch on the way home, Eris returned to her pups, hopeful that she had caught enough rabbits to feed them. Her boys were growing quickly, and she couldn't be happier. Although a part of her will deeply miss their adorable fuzzy puppy stage, Eris knows the stronger the pups get, the more likely they are to survive. She does her best to play with them and boost their spirits. Requiem and Token have both grown up knowing loss as deeply as Eris. They lost 5 of their siblings, and lost their father before they even got to meet him. Eris hopes that her tiny pack can find some happiness in the coming autumn months. The invading Mudpot pack would do their best to keep Eris from succeeding, though. Eris called out into the night, desperate to alert the stranger wolves that they were here and would fight for their home. Unfortunately, her ruse wouldn't work very well. The Mudpot pack knew that Eris was alone, had only 2 pups, and they knew exactly where she lived. Eris spent as much time with her pups as she could spare, but she needed to go out hunting once more. More rabbits. She needed more and more rabbits. Her exhaustion was starting to creep up on her, but she needed to feed the boys. At least the storm seemed like it was on the verge of ending. Eris longed for the day that she could hunt real meal for her boys. They had been surviving for so long on scraps she could find, and she was desperate to give them a taste of real meat. Eris couldn't remember, but she didn't think Requiem or Token had ever had real meat that wasn't already regurgitated. It was a sad thought, and it made her feel like a bad mother, but she knew the truth. She was a good mother, and she'd do anything to save her pups. Unfortunately, today would not be the day that the boys had their first taste of real food. Instead, it would be rabbits upon rabbits. Eris was tired of eating the nasty little critters. She had grown to hate the taste of them after being forced to eat practically hundreds of rabbits over the past several months. But Eris was nothing if not determined to keep her pups fed. As usual, the town proved to be a fruitful place to search when in need of rabbits. After practically decimating today's rabbit population, Eris made her way home. Would this round of rabbit hunting be enough to satisfy her hungry pups? Eris certainly hoped so, because she was exhausted. She had been awake for an unknowable amount of time. The mud pot pack still howled in the distance, so Eris howled back, desperate to deter the invaders. At least they sounded pretty far enough away that they wouldn't be getting too close to the rendezvous site. Once she had given every bit of food to her pups, they confirmed that they were full, and Eris collapsed in the grass to sleep. Her dreams were more like nightmares, with dog packs and wolves killed by bison. She hoped it wasn't an omen for her next mate. Eris was at least partially rested now and feeling a bit better. The mudpot's incessant howling had stopped too. She checked in on the boys, who seemed quite happy to see her. They always woke up before she did and got into mischief. Satisfied that her pups were well, but hungry, Eris set off in the search of, you guessed it, rabbits. However, there was something else happening in the territory to the east that Eris wanted to check out. The Mudpot Pack had made a huge fuss over taking over much of Eris's territory. They howled for hours as they claimed what wasn't theirs, until the howling stopped suddenly and their scent no longer traveled to Eris. It was strange. As Eris visited her territory borders, the Mudpot Pack hadn't even bothered to leave scent marks. Eris quickly reclaimed territory they had weakened and sent up some questioning howls. At first, nobody answered. Then a reply confirmed something rather interesting. Clay, the leader of the Mudpot Pack, had died. Eris wagged her tail with satisfaction. Served him right. If she was lucky, Clay's pack would crumble without him, and she wouldn't have to deal with such an unwelcoming neighbor. Eris continued her journey until she stumbled upon the scent of a carcass. A pack of coyotes and dogs were fighting over it. They growled and yapped, distracting each other so Eris could sneak in and steal the remaining scraps off the carcass. She felt pretty pleased with herself after that and went on to catch an ungodly number of rabbits. This area of the forest was great for rabbit hunting. There was an elk herd down here too, but Eris wasn't inclined to pay them a visit just yet. She wanted to fully heal before risking a major hunt, so her belly slowly filled up with rabbits. Eris's confidence in herself was starting to grow stronger day by day. She was an unmatched rabbit tracker, and the stranger wolves she had been seeing for so long were nowhere to be found. If the Mudpot Pack had dissolved, Eris would happily take over the land they once claimed. It would have to wait until her pups were a bit bigger, though. Right now, they were still too small to fight or hunt. In fact, Eris had been separated from them for far too long tonight. The sliver of a moon was overhead, and she didn't realize how long she had been gone. She was utterly exhausted, but she began her mad dash home. Her boys would start to wander if she didn't return to them quickly. As she neared the rendezvous site, she realized Requiem's scent was stale, and only Token came out to greet her. But there was another scent. Dog. Eris rushed to hide Token and went on offense against the dogs. She had no idea where Requiem had gone, but she couldn't leave Token to go find him. Thankfully, it was only one dog. One stupid dog. And after a few solid chomps from Eris's massive canines, the pet was spooked. Still, there seemed to be no sign of Requiem, and Eris was starting to get deja vu. Dread began to sink as she called to him and heard no answer. Where had he gone? How could he have wandered off so far on his own? Eris let out another desperate call to her son, and this time he replied. She raced toward the source of the squealy little howl, towards the town. She managed to pick up his scent trail, but it was so twisted and convoluted that she could hardly follow it. He had to be close, though. The dogs lingered around the town, and if Requiem were picked off by one of them, Eris didn't know what she would do. She let out another howl to him, but he didn't need to answer. She could see him. There, he was on the bridge. Eris rushed to her son. Her relief was like 1,000 bison lift off of her, but that was quickly clouded by anger. She barked at Requiem harshly for wandering off like that. He didn't seem to be listening. Eris barked again. She was so tired and worried for Token, alone, in the grass. When he finally turned to go back home, Eris ran ahead to lead the way, but when she turned around, he had wandered off again. With a grumble to herself, Eris ran back to her naughty pup, furiously barked at him, and began trotting home. This time, Requiem followed, and Eris did not take her eyes off of her prodigal son. The disobedience was a sign that the boys were not yet ready to become nomadic. They'd never survive out there if they didn't follow her instructions very closely. But they were getting very close. Requiem had wandered so far that they were on their way to leaving. Eris couldn't wait. After feeding her pups, she even played bow to Token with excitement. She was eager for the future of her pack. Exhausted and content, Eris lay down, ready for some much-deserved rest. That is, until Token wandered off. Eris could feel her hackles rising. She woofed at Requiem to hide. He listened immediately. He knew he was still in big trouble. Eris howled for Token, but the only reply was dispersal wolves. She tried to follow his scent, but the wind was strong, so she continued howling to him. There was still no answer, and Eris began to panic, sniffing around like a bloodhound, desperate for a scent. There he was. Eris barked at him the same way she barked at Requiem. She expected much more from Token. He was the more mature of the brothers, and he should never be wandering off so far. He knew much better than that, and he sullenly followed his mom back home. Exhausted and frazzled, Eris sent her boys back into the tall grass. She promised that one day they would never have to hide again, before she set off once more for food. The dozens of rabbits she had caught weren't enough, so she needed to find more. town was beautiful at this time of the year. The trees were the color of blazing fire, and their dead leaves on the ground crunched under Eris's paws. She didn't have much time to admire the autumn, though. She was on a mission, chasing competitors out of her town and catching any prey she could find and reasonably catch. That meant only rabbits, of course. Eris begged to one day never have to eat another rabbit again. After a long hunting session, she was reasonably full and ran home. When she arrived, the boys were tucked away in the exact spots she had left them in, and she knew. They were ready. The boys had grown so big, and Eris was so thrilled to try out their very first taste of real meat together. But the only thing these young hunters wanted to do was sleep. Eris didn't mind one bit and curled up between the gravestones one last time. A small snowstorm had blown in overnight, and the ground was getting a light coating of white. Today was the day. The boys were very hungry. Eris rallied them together and led them into town, where prey always lingers. A large herd of elk awaited them, and Eris could hardly contain her excitement. Her plan was to spook the herd into the town, where they would be trapped and confused amongst the buildings. The boys followed closely with their mother, observing as her plan fell into place. Token watched patiently, learning the ways of his mother, while Requiem watched the elk in eager anticipation for a nice meal. The elk rushed off into the town and began to break into smaller groups as the buildings separated them. Eris's plan was working. She used her keen eyes to pinpoint any that seemed slow or weak while also dodging the flying hooves of the other elk. She selected a calf and allowed the chaos to confuse its mother. Bobbing and weaving, Eris chased the calf through the town, carefully dodging the elk and the terrified mother. She was like a machine, working and hunting with intelligence and strength she never thought she was capable of. Something about having her two sons here with her, out in the wide open spaces, no longer needing to hide or run, felt good. It was satisfying to her. She bit and snapped at the calf until finally it went down. A snowy feast awaited her two surviving pups. They scarfed down as much food as they could fit into their bellies. She did it. She had managed to keep two of her pups alive so far. The odds were not good, and everything was stacked against her, but Requiem II and Token had lived. Tired but content, Eris found a tree to lay under and collapsed. Her pups ate and played as she slowly drifted off to sleep in the light snow. They did it. They had survived.